This video shows how to make an automatic feed system that you can easily set up yourself. Why do top drip feed? Because it's very efficient and precisely controlled, providing just the nutrients you want to provide, just when you want to provide them. Used in commercial farms and many different types of grow operations, top drip feed can be used with soil or hydroponics. When it comes to electrical safety, make very sure to keep all electricity high in the grow room and all water low in the grow room, and make sure that anything electrical that touches water, like your feed pumps, are connected to GFI protected outlets for your own safety. By combining the standard hydro-flexible hoses with Pecs rigid hoses, you can build any hydro system you want to. These are the 3/4 and 1/2 inch hose sizes in the more economical black flexible hydro hose and the heavier duty white flexible hydro hoses. The fittings in the middle there will press fit and form a very good seal into either one of these kinds of hoses. Works better if you get the connecting points moist to slide them together, and some of them may require a fair bit of pressure. You don't need to use clamps with these. This fixture I use on the bottom of my drain pans and also on the drain buckets. Very useful. And you add a little silicone to those and you get a very tight seal for any kind of drain situation. These hose clamps here can be nailed conveniently to any wood surface. I like to use the 3/8 to 7/8 inch stainless steel clamps because those will work for either the 1/2 inch or the 1/4 inch hose. Pecs plumbing pieces provide excellent rigid pieces for your hydro feed system. Use the crimp rings and the crimp tool pictured here to clamp on whatever pieces you need. I have a plug in one end and a straight through fixture on the other end. Here's an example of a more complex piece that has multiple feed hoses coming off it, 1/2 inch hoses coming off a 3/4 main hose. There are your 3/4 inch crimp rings. That gray tool is very convenient for cutting. 3/4 inch tubing. Clamps will let you join the flexible hose to the rigid hose. There's a huge array of different kinds of bits and pieces that are available with Plex plumbing. With regard to the Plex piping, I highly recommend getting straight 10-foot pieces from your local home supply store. The straight pieces are much easier to work with than anything that's curved. This is most of the Pecs pieces that I've used in years of building my own hydro feed systems. You really don't need a whole lot of pieces. This is all of them from a whole lot of work. 3/4 inch and 1/2 inch, a crimping tool and a cutting tool. I'm using 3/4 inch hoses for the main feed lines and the drain lines, and for the final feed lines that run out to the last 2 or 3 plants that branch out, I'm using 1/2 inch feed lines, and that seems to be working out very well. The setup in this video will work well for a garden the size of a closet to a small bedroom. I find the easiest way to cut down the 1/2 inch pipe is just to use an X-Acto knife and to twist the hose underneath the knife, and that lets it cut through. Make sure you get a very sharp blade. I do try to make sure that these crimps that close and seal the ends of the Pecs hose are positioned just so that the part of the ring that sticks out does not run the risk of bumping up against and scarring the main stem of your plant. Drill slowly when you drill to make the holes in a controlled way and not accidentally cut through both sides of the Pecs hose. And I do mark the opposite side of the hose from where I drill it. That way you can look from above, see a big black mark that lets you know where the hole is, and know that the hole is on the opposite side underneath that. Anytime you're joining the Pecs, do need to use the correct crimp rings and crimp tool. That tool is really the only tool you have to buy to work with Pecs. I like to use the new heavy-duty white hose because it's a little bit less likely to crimp. It's a bit thicker, more likely to stay where you put it. Wherever you're joining the hydro hose to the Pecs hose, you do need to use a hose clamp. So you use the crimp rings joining Pecs to Pecs, but when you join the hydro stuff to the Pecs stuff, you're going to use a hose clamp in order to get everything good and tight and get the different pieces to fit together. I like to use plant wire. the same plant wires support the plants with to hold the feed systems in place, and to find a system that wraps around support poles on either side and then does one wrap for underneath, one wrap above onto the hose. Does a great job of holding it in place. I do have to clean off the Pecs feed rails each cycle, just because you get a fair bit of salts coming off of that from the hydro feed itself, and you want to make quite sure to clean things up, wipe them down between cycles to keep everything good and healthy. And I'll use the drill bit that I originally drilled the holes out with to make sure the holes still stay clean. For the feed pump, what I like to do is to zip tie that tightly to a 3/4 section of PEX pipe that's not used to carry water, but just used as a waterproof stick, as it were, to be able to move the pump and position it in the bottom of the tank by drilling a hole in the side of the hose and then running the zip tie through it, and one more zip tie a little higher up. As you can see, it gives me something with a handle on it where I can fairly easily put the hose down in the bottom of the tank. Pictured here, I'm using a 55-gallon barrel with a 400-gallon-per-hour pump and a 160-gallon-per-hour mix pump. That size feed pump works well for a 4x8 foot to an 8x8 foot canopy. Use a larger or smaller pump for other sized canopies. Always set the pump to maximum feed rate. I like to cut the top of the barrel down to provide a notch to run in the wiring. You can also drill some clean holes through for your feed pipes. I have a automatic pH balance setup that has sensors on it at the bottom of this other stick here. If you're not going to go quite that fancy, then you just use a pH meter to measure the pH by hand. Another important consideration is that you cannot fill your reservoir to a higher level than where your feed lines come out, or your reservoir will siphon out. We'll just keep feeding out through those feed lines until the reservoir comes down to the level of the feed lines. So what I'm doing here is installing a siphon break that will allow the pump to feed water and nutrients to the feed lines, but once the pump stops pumping, it'll allow air to enter the line and avoid siphoning the pump out. This is a siphon break that I'm putting the plumber's pipe tape onto. You find those typically on top of hot water heaters. They're available in hardware stores. I'm attaching that to a 3/4 NPT to 3/4 PEX fitting, getting that good and tight, and then I'll be attaching that to the top of a short section of PEX pipe that will branch off from the feed line, from the pump, to the feed rails, and this will allow me to fill that feed tank as high as I want to without having to worry about siphoning the upper part of that tank into the feed system before I'm ready for the feed to proceed. I do want to make sure to check that there are no leaks after doing anything with the plumbing system, but I find this works like a charm and lets me fill the reservoir as high as I want to. I recommend setting the feed timer for each feed long enough to have a small amount of runoff, typically shooting for around 20% runoff. That usually is about a 2 or 3 minute feed time. And in terms of how often to run the feed timer, I only do feeds when the lights are on, and most of the time I'm feeding either 2 or 3 times a day. Adjust as needed for your garden, as conditions can vary considerably. When you first set up your hydro system, it's a really good idea to carefully check how much is being fed from each of the feed locations in your system. Set up measuring cups underneath each of the feed areas and get an accurate reading of exactly how much is being fed out to each plant location, assuring even feeding throughout the garden.